Welcome to this week's episode of Wide Angle. Today we're discussing this very real move that many people think is being made towards rewriting history. Sangeet Som, the BJP's leader from Uttar Pradesh, decided to call the Taj Mahal a blot on history, saying it was built by traitors and it should be brought down. The UP Chief Minister, of course, very quickly did a course correction on that, said no, it was built by Indians, it is the hard work of Indians, but really calls into question the regular statements that come out from many leaders affiliated to the national government right now about the role of the Mughals and the entire period of medieval history. So joining us to discuss some of these developments, we have with us Professor Sunil Kumar from Delhi University, who teaches medieval history at the Delhi University, and independent scholar and somebody who brings history to life really for most of us, Sohail Hashmi, who leads the Delhi Heritage Walks and walks us through so many of these very monuments scattered around the capital. But I think first, Professor Kumar, if I can come to you, the significance of the Taj Mahal as an iconic piece of architecture, as a statement of the time, what is it about the Taj Mahal that is becoming so controversial suddenly?
Well, see, let me just go back to the original premise of your statement, that we're picking up this point that was made about rewriting history. Well, you know, one doesn't rewrite history, one writes history. And part of the whole process of writing history is debate and dialogue between it. But history is not an open-ended profession. I mean, it's not like anyone. Anyone can become a historian. There's a training involved. Not everyone can become a doctor in the same way, not everyone can become a historian. So we need to be very careful about treating everything that is said in the name of history or everything that is said in the name of medicine at par. So in this case, I mean, just the debate about, let's say, 300 years of our history, is it of relevance? Of course it's of relevance. Whether it's the Mughals or whether it's the British or whether it's, you know, the Delhi Sultans or Mauryas or whoever, 300 years of our past, how can you erase that? What do? You just fill this gap up with what? Yes, I mean, so it's our past. And now there's then an associated question that you have, that we tend to think as we write nations that we have, as it were, a linear organic history. What we are has come down in some linear sequential mode from the past. It's never happened. Modern nations might like to pretend that's the case as they seek for histories of their modern politics, but that's modern politics. All new nations tend to do that. You know, the really tragic thing about us, India, is that we're behaving like one of these nations that got formed in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
You know, that today we all of a sudden say, so what is our past? I said, don't you know your past? We've been reading this past, we've been debating this past, we've been writing about this past longer than most nations in the world.
Right.
And so now this debate is actually a debate of forgetting. You want to forget your past, and in its place you want to put in something else. That's the debate.
I think that's an interesting framing of it as well, because you're right, many people talk in this language of rewriting, but reframing the past, I think, is also critical, forgetting the past. But, you know, just coming to this in a little more detail, you were talking just now about not having a linear narrative in the construction of nation states, certainly not one in the construction of India as we know it today. Apart from the Taj Mahal and the statements we've seen on that, Maharashtra and Rajasthan's attempt to change the syllabus of history, remove the role of Akbar, highlight another ruler perhaps more boldly, etc. Rulers by their very nature, whether they were Hindu or Muslim or British, were feudal, were autocratic, were, you know, trying to control power with them at the cost of so many of their subjects. Some were perhaps more benevolent than others, but ultimately a ruler is a person who's holding on to power. So in that sense, if you think about it, whether it's a Mughal ruler or a British ruler or an ancient Indian ruler, they were doing the same thing.
Well, indeed, you could, in the pre-modern world, before you might have had notions of civil society, before you might have ideas about representative government. You might have a small cadre of people seeking to control power in a variety of different ways, not just seeking to control power, but also explaining their need to this power in a righteous mode. Now, if you don't understand the rhetoric that is generated at any moment in time, and you think of it as, let's say, truth, and so all your time is spent saying, well, this claim is false, or this claim is righteous, then where are we in the modern nation? We are looking at the rhetorical statements made by different bodies of people in the past and trying to link ourselves with any one of them selectively. So you go back and say, well, you see, Ashoka might have been right, or Chandragupta might have been right. You know, who are our heroes for the modern nation?
Right.
That's when the selection happens. That's when you say, well, you see, the Mughals didn't satisfy all of our, then you have to underline this part, all of our modern needs. And so let's ignore them.
Okay, Sohail Saab, let me bring you in also onto this conversation. Now, you know, the Taj Mahal is, I think, so synonymous with India internationally, World Heritage Site, tourists flock to it, you see it on posters and billboards across the world when people talk about India, book covers, everything. And then you have these kinds of statements coming from leaders of a state who should actually be using it to attract development and attract investment and attract attention. It's somehow so contradictory.
No, it isn't very contradictory, because the entire discourse on which they have risen and reached where they have is based on hating the other. And this is a fascist discourse. This is the discourse they have developed. And how it gets mediated in the middle suddenly is when you begin counting the notes that are coming in. So, one gentleman gets up and says, this is a blot on the fair face of
history.
history.
India. Yeah.
And the same place, which was the same structure that was described so beautifully by Rabindranath Tagore as a tear on the face of eternity. So, from that to a blot on the landscape, but immediately they realized that 23% of all tourism revenue in UP is coming from the Taj alone. So, immediately the RSS makes corrections and say, we are not bothered who made it, it is Indians who built it. Now, within that, they are only talking of Indian labor.
Right.
You see the statement, it very cleverly excludes the Mughals. It is the laborer, blood and sweat of the laborers. So, they are Indian. Shah Jahan is not an Indian. You see, that is the discourse, that is the argument they are trying to build. That is why they can say this was built by a traitor. Now, the question that these people are constantly sidestepping is, how long does it take for anybody to become an Indian?
Right.
You know, Aryans came here, they refused to accept that. They say Aryans were born here. Everybody else is an outsider. Now, somebody has described Shah Jahan as somebody who was a lotera. Where did the Mughals take the wealth of this country? Except for Babur, each one of them died here. Each one of them is buried here. Half of them married Rajput princes.
Yeah.
Their progeny ruled this country, and the last Mughal king, who was evicted from here, sent on exile, kept on pining for that 2 yards where he wanted to be buried in Delhi. So, but you know, they will keep on saying that except for the Aryans, and is their definition of Aryans, everybody is an alien, everybody is an outsider. Even the aborigines of this country, they are not prepared to grant them equal rights. They call them Vanvasis. They never call them Adivasis. Because Adivasi would mean aborigines, and aborigines would mean that the Aryans are not aborigines. So, that is how they have decided how they are going to look at this country. As Professor Kumar was saying, that it is not rewriting history. They are writing a new history, what they believe is history, you know. And I'm a little familiar with this, because something similar began to happen across the border from 1947.
Right. In fact,
In
that's
Pakistan.
that's a complaint that
No, no,
many
but
people in India
we are
have.
increasingly becoming a Hindu Pakistan. That is what they want to become.
Right.
That-
In fact, Professor Kumar, come in on this because it's a very interesting point that Mr. Hashmi is raising. For as long as I can remember, as long as I've been a journalist, when we talk about India-Pakistan ties, one of the things that keeps coming up is how Pakistani history books just choose to ignore vast swaths of the subcontinent's history, and this denial in their aspiration to create this idea of Pakistan, an idea of a nation state. This is in effect doing the same thing.
Of course it is. It certainly is. I'm in complete agreement with Hashmi Saab. What has actually not been understood enough, or the implications of this which has not been understood enough, is that the writing of Pakistani history is virtually dead. There are no universities in Pakistan where history scholarship is carried out of the same merit that could be understood as Indian history. In other words, there's a clear imbalance. The number of Indian scholars coming from India who are going on and getting jobs internationally, the number of scholars coming from Pakistan going abroad and getting positions in great universities. There's a clear imbalance. The amount of publication that's happening on history, if you just compare the two, there's completely outweighed. We have great historians from Pakistan, all of whom are settled in the States or in England. There's very, very little coming out from Pakistan. Compare that with India. This has been, let's say, the foundation place which produces research students that go out and are present in all the major universities everywhere. They teach there, they get their PhDs there, they teach there, and many come back.
Right.
So the point I'm making is you follow the point that Hashmi Saab said. It has consequences.
Yeah.
It means end of intellectual debate. It means end of intellectual reproduction. It means miming the voice of the state.
Yeah.
We have a brain dead people.
This end of intellectual debate is also very interesting, Mr. Hashmi, because Asaduddin Owaisi, the day this comment was made, basically hit back at Sangeet Som and the BJP, saying, well, in that case, why is the Prime Minister making Independence Day speeches from the Red Fort? That's also built by the same person who's a traitor to India, and yet you're talking about Independence Day speeches from there. That's one part of it. The second is that, Parliament is built by the British, Rashtrapati Bhavan is built by the British. Where will this stop? I mean, everyone, if they're looking at forgetting a certain part of history, then what about colonial history? What happens to that?
You see, the way they position these things, there is a cut-off point as far as they are concerned. Their cut-off point is 12th century. So, you pick up any of their statements, nothing has happened in this country in the last 1000 years. Whatever happened in this country was prior to 1000 years. And everything was great there. Now, in that 1000 years, a whole lot of things happened. We wiped out Buddhism from this country. They will not talk about it. Any site that you go to, and archaeology is one discipline that they are very uncomfortable with, unless it is their own archaeologists. People historically came and settled down next to rivers.
River basins, right.
And they built their places of worship in places which were not likely to be flooded. Then
On hills, on high ground.
Then they moved away, somebody else came and they built their places of worship there. Then they moved away or died or lost in a war and were wiped out and somebody else came. You have civilizations upon civilizations upon civilizations on the same site. When will you stop digging? What is your cutoff? If you say, and this is what they have said, P.N. Oak, who's their resident historian who never studied history, he says that every temple, every mosque in this country is built on a temple. I am prepared to grant.
Including the Taj Mahal,
No,
the mausoleum.
everything
Yeah.
is built. Everything is built on temples or on palaces of the great Indians who ruled before the Malechas arrived. Now, if you remove all that, you're going to find temples. I am even prepared to concede that. Dig beneath the temple, what will you find? You might find a Buddhist temple.
Right, I was just going
You
to say
dig
a
beneath
vihara.
that, you might find a tribal site, a totem, because it is the people who have been settling on the same sites again and again and again and again. But as far they are concerned, they just want to establish, now this is Aryavrat has been established. Before that there was nothing, after that there was nothing. And this is not very different from what is happening in Pakistan. There was Adam, then there was Prophet Muhammad, then there was this Qasim,
Muhammad bin Qasim, the ruler.
and after that was Muhammad Ali Jinnah. That's it.
Right.
Now these little gaps of few hundred years, few thousand years in the middle,
We don't know what
no,
happened.
no,
in
no, no,
them.
they are not bothered. They refuse to recognize Mohenjo-daro as their heritage. Mohenjo-daro is not Pakistani heritage. And we have these people who want to cut off 800 years of this country's history and you know, suspend in the air. You know, from the 21st floor, how are you going to get to the 5th floor, 6th floor?
Professor Kumar, I mean, the fact is, in a sense, if you think about it, before the NDA came into power, and in the years since independence as well, you had the renaming of roads, you had buildings, you know, renamed, changed, brought down. You had King George V's statue removed from the canopy near India Gate. So, political parties are essentially doing what political parties do. How is it that this time, or is it just that we are aware differently, that the narrative seems so starkly different and worrisome in ways that perhaps we didn't realize it in the past? Was it because as a nation, colonial history is something that all of us collectively would prefer to forget, and going further back from colonial history, there are pockets different people want to remember differently? What do you think?
If I can just enlarge on that slightly. There's different things that you said. I mean, look, the search for national heroes is very much a part of any new nation's endeavor. And you look at your past and you choose your national heroes. Keeping that in mind, take a look at the names of the first streets. You will find an expansiveness, an embracing of a multitude of different people. Now, this is right after partition, right at the moment of the grievous injury that happened to the subcontinent. And how proud should we be about the size of our political imagination that we went ahead and have Shah Jahan Road, Akbar Road, Aurangzeb Road in our capital. That was the size of our political horizon. We were larger than in any political trauma that happened. We've had many political masters since those years. And one of the things that happens, of course, is the vision. The vision of the past disappears. So all of a sudden you have embracing of very narrow political ideologies. And again, you take a look at names and you'll have Rajiv Chowk, right? That's another. You'll have, you'll have Jawaharlal Nehru Stadium all of a sudden. You'll suddenly have Indira Gandhi National Airport. That's, to my mind, that's a narrowing already of our political horizons. Now, what happens is that this gets to be somewhat cumulative. One political party learns from the other. If the expansiveness of political horizons starts shrinking, and you know that this is something which is possible, that there's gain in this, there's profit in this, one person gets away with interference in the political endeavor. Let it be a communal riot, or let it be the naming of a place.
Yeah.
If that gets away, then it's free for all because there's profit in it. And now what we have here today is actually a really, really serious endeavor to rewrite our history, because all of a sudden there's no opposition.
Right.
There's no debate, you know, about what are the implications of this. And Hashmi Saab, when he's making the comparison with Pakistan, is highlighting.
Who is going to make this debate? Who is going to create this debate? Because, you know, the thing is, when an Asaduddin Owaisi is the voice who is sort of becoming the prominent opponent to a statement like this, or coming out with what seems either funny or logical, or depending on which side of the spectrum you're at, he's one person in one party which is identifiably a religious party in the country. It's not your mainstream opposition.
If I might interrupt you.
Yeah.
See, we're having this conversation right now, and the intention behind this conversation is perhaps a couple of people might look at this,
Right.
whatever we're talking about. In any democratic society, there is this thing called the public, and there is this thing called the public opinion,
Yeah.
which is supposed to be related to the media. Now, if the opposition is, and you can't tell the difference between the opposition and the ruling party in terms of discourse, surely that's something that the media should pick up. Instead, the media is as much involved in this game of nationalism.
Yeah. Today.
Completely today. I'm talking about right now. So what they've done is they've bought into the discourse of the state. They've bought into the discourse of the political party. In effect, what the media is doing is they're taking political sides on these issues, not in terms of the issues themselves, but in terms of who do we support. And if we support a person, we'll support that opinion.
Right. So, Hashmi Sahab, in terms of creating a larger narrative and sort of creating a wider debate on this, away from, two views, left, right, Hindu, Muslim, right, wrong, as the case may be, the binaries that we're in. We were chatting earlier before we started recording, and you talked about just the notion of Islamic architecture, which is the kind of architecture these people want to distance themselves from in a manner of speaking. But if you want to actually talk about your own nation, and your own nation as separate from what the British envisioned India as you pointed out earlier, that Islamic architecture was a coinage of our British past as well. So why are we being so selective if we want to forget certain...
In earlier part of the discussion, you said they were Hindu rulers, they were Muslim rulers, they were British rulers. Now that is where the problem is. If the first two phases were Hindu and Muslim rulers, then the third phase was Christian rulers and not British rulers.
Yeah.
That is how deeply they have brainwashed us. They came and presented this idea that before they arrived, it was Hindu rulers and Muslim rulers. And they came and they brought a secular rule. Now, if you go back, the time which is described as the period of so-called Muslim rule, and Dr. Kumar's entire work is in that area, he could reel out to you that behind every Muslim king, the Mansabdars were all local people. You see, they were not running a Sharia, the rule in India of the Muslim kings was not run according to Sharia. And what is described as the Hindu period, there were large period when the kings did not follow what we understand as Hinduism today. They were Jains, and they followed Buddhism and so on and so forth. And the British period, all the rulers who control everything in this country are Christians. So it is this kind of division that you have created. It is part of this that you create the mythology of Islamic architecture. Nobody talks of Christian architecture at all. And till the British arrived, and even now, archaeologists, they will talk to you about Parihar architecture, Chandel architecture, Rajput architecture, Bengal architecture. There is nothing called Hindu architecture. Architecture has no religion. The arch was made by the Romans. The dome was made by the Romans, pre-Christian Romans. You have three congregational religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and they realize this large covered space without pillars, we can use it for our prayers. Because they are congregational religions, there is a priest and others have to stand behind. They could use the dome. So you find it in the synagogues, you find it in churches and mosques. And in India, where do you find it?
The biggest church in the world is St. Peter's Basilica.
Yeah. But in India, where do you find out of Muslim?
Raisina Hill has a dome.
I'm talking of a place of worship. The Sikhs adopted the dome.
Gurudwara, right.
Because they are also congregational. They also have a priest. temple does not need a dome, because no matter how large the temple,
You're going towards the deity.
because worship is individual. You have a priest, you have an idol, you have a worshipper, or at best a family. So Garbhagriha is always small, you don't need a dome. Except I am not talking of the likes of Asaram Bapu, who are into a congregational something else, you know.
Right.
So, you know, so this idea that there is something called Islamic architecture is a very long process of othering, in which you talk of Islamic architecture, you talk of Islamic food, you talk of Islamic attire, you talk of Islamic culture.
Yeah,
you know?
but I want Professor Kumar to come in on that as well, because as a history student in Delhi University, albeit a while ago, we studied Indo-Islamic architecture. It was a term that was used very freely, and you know, something we associate, we identify. If you ask me what it is, I'll tell you minarets, domes, arches, you know, jharokhas, things like that. We'll get into that. But what Mr. Hashmi is talking about is the coinage itself being problematic.
I think you're both actually approaching it from different ends. There are many ways of carrying out analysis, and it depends upon what these terms are being used to explain. So, for example, if there is, and in art history there is a common usage saying Islamic art, it may not be entirely efficacious analytically. In other words, it does not explain nearly as much as a term might warrant, and I think Hashmi Sahib is correct here. But to mute that, you have this rather interesting point, Indo-Islamic art. Why the need for this term? One of the important needs for this term is to actually communicate that Islam is South Asian. You know, that it's to mute that other point that it came from outside. So when you say Indo-Islamic, you're not qualifying it, you're underlining the fact. You're underlining the fact that
it's from this region.
That there is a South Asian Islam, that there is a South Asian art which might have aspects of what is called conventionally Islamic, but it's just that term will not explain it. Indo-Islamic might qualify it. Now, those are the kinds of nuances that actually people have taken much further. As I said, these are analytical terms, and there are reasons for these analytical terms. But what they're actually grappling for is this history, which is layered. And because it's layered, you've got to figure out at which time you want to insert it. No one term in itself will ever capture the whole gamut of ideas that we would like. You should be asking, what term does this term actually, what question does this term actually answer?
And what term ultimately would be appropriate if there is one? We keep talking about India as a multitude of, you know, cultures and faiths and religions and things like that, which also means there's a multitude of history that we have to keep falling back to understand our present.
To go back to the Taj. One way in which you could look at the Taj, which might be interesting, but also repelling for many people, would be to say the Taj is Timurid. Which you can actually make a whole case explaining how there are elements in the construction of the Taj which carries part of Timurid heritage, but it will only be a partial answer that no one else would know. They might hear just one part of that debate. There's this whole other point, which is to say that Taj is very much a part of Agra's ecology, Agra's demography.
And within that, you know, there are constant parallels between the Taj and the Humayun's mausoleum. That is the model. But Shah Jahan sent out his people, and he borrowed actually from four separate buildings. He borrowed it from the Bada Gumbad in Golconda, the size of the dome. The idea of an entire structure built of marble is borrowed from Hoshang Shah's mausoleum in this place near Indore. Mandu. And the position of these stairs is borrowed from the mausoleum of Abdul Rahim Khan Khana. In all other mausoleums, these steps rise like that. Abdul Rahim Khan Khana in the Taj, they climb like that. So they don't have to be so tall. But aside from these four, you look at the lotuses, you look at the kalashes, which are part of Indian architecture, Indian temple architecture, which the Indian masons began to carve in mausoleums beginning from the Sultanate period. Domes and lotuses, they are all over. they were not seen as Hindu symbols till the English art historians came and said, no, but that is the Hindu symbol. You know, that is where the cleavage in our architecture happens.
Yeah.
In our heritage begins to be seen as Hindu heritage and Islamic heritage.
And I think that's, we have to wrap up the discussion. That's a really apt point, I think, at which to leave it at, that you have the dome and the kalash and the lotus all together in one, and that really is what we're talking about today.
Of
Syncretic traditions, composite cultures, you can't separate. So this attempt to keep separating one from the other ultimately is just going to lead us towards a path of darkness that I don't think we really want to embark on. I mean, it's something that we should be proud of and embrace as we go into another century.
As long as we are aware that we're not writing history, but we are forgetting history. That's the part. That's the part which we need to actually foreground. That we are actually erasing history. We are forgetting history, and we are doing so deliberately. And the people who are leading us down this path are not historians.
But also erasing history is ultimately,
they are actually
I think, to
illiterate.
everyone's detriment.
Actually, these people haven't read anything.
Yeah, it has to be. We'll have to leave it at that. Professor Kumar, Sohail Hashmi, thank you very much for being on Wide Angle with us. That's it this week.